Hello, welcome to Mediabee Color Lab. This is the very first episode of our new podcast series, something I've wanted to do for a while. If you've seen my tutorials, you know I love breaking down color grading techniques in DaVinci Resolve, showing how I build a grade node by node. But this series is going to be a little different. Here, we're slowing down. We're stepping back and we're asking the bigger questions. Because, let's be honest, knowing how to use tools is, of course, great. But if you don't know why you're using them, or let's say where you're trying to take the image, you're just turning knobs in the dark. Cinematic color grading isn't about copying a look or slapping on a LUT. It's about storytelling, mood, intention, and most importantly, it is about knowing your destination before you even touch a node. So in this podcast series, we're going to talk about the very foundations of color grading, the things that shape your eye and your decisions long before you start grading, how to think like a professional colorist. What are we looking for when we first open a project? Or how do we assess the footage? And how do we decide where we want the image to go? Today, we're starting with one of the most talked about topics in grading, film emulation. We'll be unpacking it in 4 chapters. First, we'll go back to where it all began, inside the chemical tactile world of celluloid, and see how that process shaped the colors and also textures we still chase today. Then we'll slow down and really see it, the glow, the roll-off, and the imperfections that make it feel human. Next, we'll step into the mindset and learn to grade with emotion, not just technique. And finally, we'll connect it all together and talk about how to bring that analog soul into a modern digital workflow that still feels like film. Back in the film days, and even today for filmmakers who prefer analog film, the cinematographer would shoot on a negative stock, like, Kodak Vision 2 or Vision 3. These were stocks designed to capture detail across a wide dynamic range with specific color responses. Some cooler, some warmer, some more contrasty or muted, depending on the lighting and the stock choice. Once the footage was shot, it would go through processing in a lab and then be transferred, or we used to call it timed, onto a print film like Kodak 2383. This is where color timing came in. Color timing, the analog precursor to what we now call color grading, was done using printer lights, basically physical red, green, and blue filters adjusted the exposure levels during the printing process. You couldn't just change contrast or push saturation like we do now. It was a delicate balancing act, and the look was largely baked in. So when you watch a film from the 80s or 90s, or even something like No Time to Die, which was shot on film, what you're seeing is the result of that entire analog pipeline, which includes, of course, the choice of negative stock, the exposure on set, the processing chemistry, the print stock, the positive film, and the final timing decisions made the color timer, the colorist of the time. All of that came together to create what we now remember as the film look. But what is important is it wasn't just a look, it was a whole workflow, a physical, chemical, collaborative process that was deeply baked into the DNA of filmmaking. Now, fast forward to today, we're working in a digital world. You know, clean sensors, perfect color science, infinite flexibility, and yet everyone still says, I want that filmic feel. I want it to look like it was shot on film. Or you may hear, I want texture, softness, emotion. And that's where film emulation comes in. Film emulation is the attempt to recreate all of those visual and also emotional characteristics digitally. You know, to bring the warmth, the imperfections, the character of film back into a clean digital pipeline. And the truth is, when people ask for that film look, what they really want isn't just grain or a LUT that says Kodak 2383 on it. What they're reaching for is a visual language, a kind of emotional shorthand that connects their image to something larger, something nostalgic and timeless, and as we said, human. And that's, I think, what makes film emulation so powerful. It is not just about aesthetics, it is about intent. Whether you're using a film print LUT or a full emulation pipeline like DEHANCER Pro, what matters is that you understand where this process came from. Because the more you understand the why behind it, the more intentional and expressive your grades will become. That's what film emulation is really about. Film has a softness to it, but not because it's low resolution. It is in the grace of how it responds to light. You know, the way highlights roll off instead of clipping, or the way saturation eases down instead of collapsing, the way shadows hold on to life instead of disappearing into darkness, black. In other words, there is kind of breathing quality to it. The skin tones glow gently, not because of diffusion filters, but because of how film reacts to exposure, especially in those delicate midtones. Or else speculators, let's say, they bloom. Transitions feel organic. Edges feel alive. For instance, for a second, close your eyes and picture it. A face caught in a late afternoon sunlight. The warm gold brushing across skin. The background falling softly out of focus. That's depth, but it's not sharp. It feels like memory. Or think of a night scene where neon signs peel color into the darkness, reds and cyans blending, not fighting each other. The shadows still hold detail, like whispers you can almost hear. And that's the feeling we're chasing when we talk about film emulation. Not a filter, not a preset, but that quiet human imperfection that makes an image feel realer than real, I can say. Because in the end, film doesn't just show you what something looked like, it shows you how it felt to be there, if you know what I mean. When I open a project and I know I'm chasing that filmic feel, my entire mindset shifts. It's not about perfection anymore. It's about character. I'm not hunting for the cleanest image or the sharpest contrast. I'm looking for that quiet tension between order and chaos. The way film always seemed to live somewhere between control and accident. For instance, I'll sit there watching how the light rolls off a cheekbone, or how a window bloom starts to glow just before it clips. Digital perfection would tell me to fix it immediately, of course, but the filmic part of my brain kind of whispers, leave it, it's beautiful. Or sometimes I'll even let a little texture in, grain that dances, halation that bleeds ever so slightly. Because don't forget, film isn't sterile, it's alive. And when it breathes, the image feels more human. And in doing so, I start thinking less about the timeline preview and more about the print, the final look. How would this scene feel if it were projected in a dark theater? Would it hold up under the warmth of a bulb hitting celluloid? That thought alone changes everything about how I approach the grade. So understand this. The real questions I ask myself aren't technical ones. They are more emotional. For instance, what is the temperature of this scene? Does it burn hot or does it hum quietly? Or what era, what mood am I referencing? Is this world meant to feel inviting or imposing, raw or refined? Because film emulation at its best isn't about trying to look retro. It's about being intentional. It's about understanding what you want your audience to feel and shaping every highlight, every shadow, every tone so it speaks that language we're intending to achieve. So now that we've talked about how to see like a film colorist, let's talk about how to work like one. How to build a digital workflow that honors those analog roots, from color science to texture, from density to print contrast. When I start grading with a film emulation mindset, I'm not thinking about plugins or LUTs yet. I'm thinking about structure. Because in the film days, there was a physical order to everything. You had the negative stock, the processing chemistry, and finally the print stock. And each layer here shaped the image in a specific, predictable way. So in the digital world, I try to rebuild that structure. I start with my base color space, something white and neutral, like DaVinci White Gamut or ACES. You may call it my negative. It is where all the color and latitude live. Then I move toward my print, that final transformation that defines contrast, saturation, and color density. Everything in between, the tone shaping, the balance, the texture, is my color timing stage, the color grading. That order matters because the closer you follow the logic of film, the more your digital image starts to behave like film. And during the grading process, when I shape the contrast, for instance, I'm not just stretching curves, I'm sculpting density. Film doesn't snap from light to dark. It eases into it with a subtle roll through the mids. So I build my contrast curve gently, thinking of it less like a line and more like a slope, you can call it. Something the light can travel through gracefully. Then comes color separation, for instance. Film has this beautiful way of letting colors breathe on their own without bleeding into each other. It is not about oversaturation, it's about relationship. The reds still feel red, for instance, but they don't scream. The greens stay natural. The blues have air around them. So when I'm grading, I keep asking myself, do these colors still have space to exist? I think that's a very, very critical question. And then comes texture, for instance. This is where digital images so often fall apart. Uh, Film grain isn't just noise, it is structure. It gives the light something to cling to. It adds kind of movement, life, and of course, imperfection. So I'll bring in a fine layer of grain, not to make it look old, but to give it that organic depth, that tactile presence you feel when light passes through emulsion. When it comes to halation or bloom, these are the little quirks that make an image breathe. You don't need to overdo them, of course, just enough to remind your eye that what you're watching isn't sterile, it's alive. And finally, I always land on the print look, as I said. That's where the image finds its home. A good print emulation, whether it's Kodak 2383 or let's say Fuji 3510 or a custom tone map, isn't just about color. It is about how the image rests, the way highlights taper off, or the way blacks never go fully dead. It is the final translation from digital light to something that feels projected, tangible, and cinematic. That's what I mean by working like a film colorist. It's not about using the same tools they had. It's about thinking the same way, building your image intentionally, layer by layer, like you're developing a print in a dark room, slow, deliberate, and patient. Because when you do that, the image stops feeling like data. It starts to feel like cinema. So, please remember, film emulation is powerful, but only when you approach it with the mindset of a storyteller. Let's say a technician can match tone curves, but a colorist interprets emotion. In the next episode, we'll keep exploring these foundational ideas. Whether it is how to read a waveform like a cinematographer, or how to define your destination before touching a single control. Until then, thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also feel free to share it with a fellow filmmaker, DP, or a colorist. And as always, stay inspired, stay intentional, and keep crafting beautiful images. This is Ilker from Mediabee Color Lab, and I'll see you in the next one.